He says wealth here is measured in unhurried dinners, soft laughter, and bills paid without panic. He says wealth here is also measured in sleep that reaches the deep end. He says wealth is being loved without being managed. He says being loved will not erase your individuality, it will unveil it. He says you will stop editing your eccentricities until they are bland enough to be safe. He says you will learn how your exact shape is useful. He says useful does not mean exploited, it means purposeful. He says your purpose will stop feeling like a chore and start tasting like honey in tea. He says the person I am sending will sip with you, not drain you. He says your creativity will find its legs and ask for shoes. He says you will walk ideas into rooms where they become meals. He says others will eat and remember their own recipes. He says the world needed you whole the whole time. He says that is why this appointment could not be cancelled. He says even your delays have been woven into arrival. He says arrival is not a single event but a rhythm. He says you will learn to keep tempo without clenching your jaw. He says your jaw will forgive you for all the nights you made it a shield. He says the person I am sending will show up in truth, not costume. He says they will have done their own work and will not substitute charm for repair. He says they will not be perfect, they will be present. He says presence is what heals timelines. He says you will feel time change in their hello. He says some rooms will brighten as if someone opened a window on purpose. He says you are allowed to trust what does not rush you. He says you are allowed to trust what keeps showing up. He says you are allowed to trust your own discernment, newly oiled and newly awake. He says you were never too much, you were carrying too much. He says the person I am sending will help you set it down carefully. He says what you set down will not be stolen. It will be archived. He says your archive will become curriculum for those you teach by living. He says you teach best when you are not trying to be impressive. He says your ordinary is the exact place where extraordinary hides and waits to be named. He says the naming will be gentle, like a sunrise deciding how bright to be. He says you will stop apologizing for glowing. He says your glow will not blind anyone who belongs. He says the map to this moment was honest about the valleys. He says it was also honest about the table at the summit. He says the person I am sending will know which chair is theirs and will not reach for yours. He says you will notice how quiet power feels. He says it does not demand witnesses, and yet it gathers witnesses anyway. He says that is what happens when peace takes up residency. He says residency requires address. He says your address is changing from almost to already. He says the mail has been forwarded, the letter marked, arriving, is at your door. He says open. He says receive. He says live. He says hold this like warm bread, share it like light, and protect it like breath on a winter morning. He says do not delay the yes that has already grown roots. He says the one I am sending is on the threshold, and thresholds prefer courage. He says step forward now and let today become a birthplace. He says keep your soul in a posture that welcomes, not inspects. He says learn the gift of being met halfway. He says those who told you to expect less were managing their own fear. He says you will bless them by succeeding without spite. He says success, for you, will sound like peace walking around your home. He says your home will learn your laughter again. He says your mirrors will stop testing you and start congratulating you. He says your windows will frame a future that waves back. He says where shame used to sit, dignity will take the seat. He says dignity will drink water and ask if you are thirsty too. He says the person I am sending will pour before you ask. He says the meal of your life is served, eat slowly. He says the cup of your life is full, sip gratefully. He says the bill has been settled, leave the tip of your kindness on every table you pass. He says the road from here will not be empty of weather, but your shelter will travel with you. He says you will tell storms who you are, and they will make room. He says the rainbow is not a trick, it is a covenant written in color. He says you will not need to seek omens under every stone. He says you will become an omen of good to others. He says that is what living in alignment does to a person. He says let the news find you ready, someone is coming who carries tomorrow's key. He says do the small brave things today that make tomorrow feel expected. He says stand by the door, you will not stand long. He says when the knock arrives, breathe once, breathe twice, and open. He says let your welcome be soft and your eyes be honest. He says you were made for this exact tenderness at this exact time. He says this is your green light. He says cross. He says come home to the season that has been hunting for you with love. He says it again, because repetition is a balm to anxious minds. He says I am sending someone into your life who will honor your pace, protect your peace, and multiply your purpose. He says it is near, it is kind, it is real. He says you may rest your shoulders now. He says you may lift your chin now. He says you may receive now. He says the rest of the story will be written in the ink of small consistencies. He says you will sign your name each day with choices that match your hope. He says the signature will look like you finally letting good things be easy. He says all of this is already in motion, and the motion favors you. He says proceed with softness and with spine. He says the threshold is warm. He says the warmth you feel is not a trick of the room but the truth of your season. He says welcome what is arriving without shouting at what is leaving. He says endings do not deserve the same attention as beginnings. He says begin now, begin true, begin simple. He says let love enter like light under a door. He says answer the light with your life. He says this message will travel with you as a quiet escort into the days ahead. He says if you forget, your body will remember on your behalf. He says the air will remind you when you step outside. He says there is nothing else to wait for. He says you have waited well. He says the knock is at the door. If you wish to express your support further, you have the option to give super thanks, with contributions of up to $20. Archangel Michael says the next segment of this message is a bridge you can walk, steady and unharmed. He says the boards beneath your feet were tested by storms you never saw. He says each plank is a promise and each nail is a yes that already belongs to you. He says make room like you are expecting a guest who knows your soul. He says clear a chair at your table, not out of superstition, but out of alignment. He says space is a form of faith that invites what is meant to arrive. He says take inventory of what drains you and set it down without asking its permission. He says release the worn-out masks that kept you accepted but never seen. He says the person I am sending will not ask you to perform your worth. He says prepare a simple ritual of welcome you can repeat without strain. He says light a small candle in the evening and let your breath become its companion. He says this is not magic, it is agreement with peace. He says write a note to your future self and date it with today's courage. He says fold it carefully and place it where morning light can touch it. He says you will be surprised by how quickly your handwriting learns to trust. He says suddenly you will notice the exact kindness you once offered freely returning to you with interest. He says the return will be quiet and unmistakable. He says it will carry the sound of shoes at your door that do not stomp. He says your story has reached the chapter where support does not argue with your calling. He says in this chapter, love does not audition, it participates. He says participation is the new gravity that holds the best of you in place. He says the person arriving will honor your healing tempo and will not rush your softness. He says they will bring strong patience and a listening that remembers. He says relief will take a seat beside you like a wise elder who has time. He says measure new meetings by how your nervous system feels afterward. He says the right presence lowers thunder inside your chest. He says the wrong presence asks your shoulders to become walls again. He says you will develop a reflex for gentleness and it will not make you naive. He says gentle people are not easy to deceive, they are simply hard to provoke. He says that difficulty is a shield you earned by choosing peace over spectacle. He says schedule small joys the way you once scheduled worries. He says treat joy like an appointment that deserves honesty. He says this trains life to bring you the help you stopped pretending you didn't need. He says you are allowed to keep the parts of your solitude that are holy. He says union without erasure is the standard now. He says the person I am sending will celebrate your sanctuary, not evict it. He says you can be both rooted and reachable. He says the right connection respects the soil that nourished you. He says it also brings rain without flood. He says the gatekeepers of your past will not understand the ease you are learning. He says their confusion is not your curriculum. He says your only lesson now is stewardship of what arrives. He says answer your life the way a lighthouse answers the sea. Reliably, without panic. He says reliability is a love language you already speak. He says the one arriving speaks it fluently too. He says prepare your home like a promise to your spirit. He says open a window, change a small thing, sweep a forgotten corner. He says small changes teach destiny where to land. He says cultivate a circle that can hold your expansion without shrinking their own. He says abundance multiplies among people who choose wonder over comparison. He says the one I am sending knows how to multiply. He says do not bury your preferences beneath gratitude. He says gratitude and preference are companions, not rivals. He says honoring what you truly enjoy makes you easier to recognize to the one who is looking for you. He says your mornings will begin to sound different soon, like a city waking gently. He says this sound is your new baseline of calm. He says calm is not the absence of movement, it is movement without panic. He says you can trust the calendar of your becoming. He says delays were detours that sharpened your perception. He says perception is the lamp that will illuminate this arrival. He says when you meet them, your body will understand before your mind finishes its sentences. He says your jaw will loosen, your breath will deepen, your eyes will soften. He says this is your internal yes doing its work. He says remember, storytellers of doom will attempt to sell you certainty dressed as fear. He says you owe fear no further payments. He says your attention is now invested only where growth compounds. He says pack a small bag with courage, boundaries, tenderness, and focus. He says these are the provisions for the journey that begins at hello. He says you are supplied already, you are not behind. He says refine your daily rhythm so the doorbell of destiny doesn't find you in self-sabotage. He says choose rest that replenishes, not escape that empties. He says choose work that aligns, not hustle that hides. He says your legacy is being written in straightforward sentences. He says clarity is a music you will be able to dance to without rehearsal. He says the dance floor is the path under your feet. He says the mentor version of this arrival would map your future with humility. He says the partner version would hold your future with tender competence. He says the friend version would guard your future like their own. He says whichever form appears first, the signature is the same: safety, steadiness, sincerity. He says counterfeit connections reveal themselves by demanding speed and offering spectacle. He says real connection opts for presence over performance. He says let timing be an ally, not a judge. He says an ally knows how to wait without wasting. He says waiting with wonder is not idle, it is constructive trust. He says practice receiving compliments like you are returning to fluent speech. He says speak thank you without diminishing the truth of your glow. He says the one I am sending will mirror this language until you remember it by heart. He says you will learn the timeline of honest intimacy: notice, nourish, name. He says notice the seeds, nourish the sprouts, name the tree only when shade arrives. He says naming too early invites pressure, naming in season invites roots. He says instead of chasing signs, become one. He says become the evidence that tenderness can be disciplined. He says become the place where hope keeps its shoes by the door. He says dress tomorrow in choices that do not punish today. He says the person I am sending will not ask you to mortgage your peace. He says they will invest in your calm as if it were shared property. He says your creativity will find collaborators, not critics. He says you will be escorted into rooms that once made you small and you will fit with comfort. He says fitting will mean authenticity, not conformity. He says grief will continue teaching you where love once stood. He says let it teach without letting it govern. He says the one arriving knows how to sit with your memories without rearranging them. He says speak kindly to your reflection until kindness becomes the default dialect. He says skin remembers both cruelty and care, choose care until memory changes its tune. He says the person I am sending will harmonize, not drown you out. He says no more contests with people who refuse context. He says your context is holy and complex and worthy of soft understanding. He says the one arriving will read context before offering counsel. He says you are stepping into a life where rest is a strategy. He says retreat will become a method, not a mercy flight. He says your schedule will learn to bow to your wellness. He says wealth will begin to look like time you're not forced to sell. He says wealth will also look like decisions made without emergency. He says the one I am sending counts wealth and wholeness and practices it daily. He says your hands will become less eager to fix what is not your assignment. He says your feet will become more eager to stand where you are truly sent. He says assignments that match your anointing feel like truth, not pressure. He says expect your name to be spoken in rooms you have not yet entered. He says favor is not a spotlight, it is a doorway with your measurements. He says the person I am sending stands at one such door with keys that do not jingle for attention. He says advise your fears that their contract has expired. He says they can collect their belongings from the basement of your ribs and leave quietly. He says the eviction notice is written in peace. He says keep your friendships hydrated with presence and honesty. He says the right circle understands the weather of your calling. He says they will celebrate the arrival without declaring themselves meteorologists. He says your laughter will travel farther now that the air is kinder. He says it will find its way into rooms and loosen bolts on old doors. He says bolts that loosen from laughter rarely rust again. He says the tenderness you were mocked for is the exact doorway this blessing will use. He says do not harden what heaven intends to inhabit. He says softness with boundaries is strength dressed in wisdom. He says you will gather small wins like pebbles, then realize you've built a path. He says the path will not demand applause, it will simply deliver you. He says delivered is who you are becoming. He says music will sound different after you are seen. He says colors will lean closer as if they have something sweet to confess. He says even your silence will taste better, like tea allowed to steep. He says listen for the sentence that arrives in your spirit without punctuation. He says that sentence is direction, not debate. He says you may follow it with the confidence of a river knowing the sea. He says the person I am sending will catch your quietest signals and respond without making a show of accuracy. He says kindness does not need a stage to be true. He says love that lasts prefers kitchens to red carpets. He says you will finally retire the habit of over-explaining your heart. He says what understands you will not require testimony against your past. He says your future is acquitted and free to proceed. He says excellence will become your habit because peace removes friction. He says excellence is not perfection in costume, it is integrity with posture. He says the one arriving stands the same in every room. He says befriend your pace until your calendar recognizes you again. He says pace is how promise becomes embodied. He says embodiment is the victory that cannot be faked. He says the more you honor your limits, the more limitless your days will feel. He says boundaries teach abundance how to stay. He says the person I am sending values doors with hinges and windows with locks. He says a reunion is coming between who you hope to be and who you are. He says they will hug in the hallway of your next morning. He says your shadow will watch and relax. He says wake up each day and make one honest move in the direction of wholeness. He says these moves are stitches in the fabric you will wear. He says the garment will fit like destiny. He says by the time the knock sounds, nothing inside you will panic for proof. He says your peace will stand up first and smile. He says your welcome will be simple, sincere, sufficient. He says the hour is set, the path is clear, the heart is learning. He says continue preparing without dramatizing. He says the story already loves how you live it. He says you are not auditioning for your own life anymore. He says you have the role, and the role is you, unedited and awake. He says the curtain rises each morning and applauds your presence. He says when the door opens, step through like a truth that recognizes itself. He says carry your softness like a standard. He says let your steadiness do the introducing. He says this continuation is a landing strip lit with small, faithful lamps. He says keep the lights on, the approach is near. He says what is for you is not late, it is exact. He says remember this, the arrival is not your rescue, it is your resonance. He says two tuned lives make a clearer note. He says the note has already been struck in the unseen and is echoing toward you now. He says stand by the door with joy in your hands and boundaries at your back. He says the world will feel simpler when the right presence shares your air. He says simplicity is what love looks like after it matures. He says close this page gently and open your day fully. He says listen to the ordinary as it tries on wonder. He says the person I am sending will meet you exactly where the ordinary becomes holy. Archangel Michael says a second wind is filling your days with quiet power, like a tide that knows the moon by heart. He says your mornings are learning the choreography of ease without losing their strength. He says the person drawing closer carries this same ease like a lantern that does not flicker. He says your steps will gather certainty the way leaves gather light. He says roads that once felt narrow will open to your courage. He says your courage has become a map other hearts can safely follow. He says release the costume of constant urgency and wear steadiness like a tailored coat. He says steadiness suits you and tells the world the truth about your capacity. He says capacity grows in rooms where peace is practiced. He says the one I am sending respects your growth and does not negotiate it away. He says they will arrive with language that fits your values without trimming your edges. He says edges become art when they are honored. He says this connection is a bridge designed to hold real weight. He says real weight includes history, hope, and honest needs. He says the bridge was stress-tested by grace long before you saw it. He says your work will stop arguing against your wellness. He says your wellness will stop scheduling itself last. He says alignment will teach you to choose without apology. He says the person arriving will recognize the seasons you survived. He says they will not romanticize your scars, they will respect them. He says respect lays foundation faster than charm ever could. He says your home becomes a sanctuary when intention lives there. He says intention looks like clear counters, open windows, and calendars that breathe. He says breathing spaces make arrivals easier to notice. He says learn the rhythm of 3, notice, nurture, normalize. He says notice what brings quiet strength, nurture it with attention, normalize it by repetition. He says repetition becomes character when done with love. He says conversations with this person will feel like lit paths in a kind forest. He says you will not lose yourself among these trees. He says you will find versions of yourself you forgot were still waiting. He says you are not an emergency to be solved. He says you are a wonder to be stewarded. He says stewardship feels like care with a spine. He says your schedule can hold both devotion and play. He says play repairs what stress attempted to bend. He says devotion guides the energy that play awakens. He says apologize less for your needs. He says the right presence treats your needs as trusted coordinates. He says trusted coordinates make journeys smoother. He says money will begin to serve the mission rather than the panic. He says generosity will cease to be performance and return to being principle. He says principle is a compass that does not bargain. He says the door you open to this arrival will open others behind it. He says expansion travels in families of blessings. He says families of blessings prefer tables to stages. He says speak to yourself like a beloved returning from a long road. He says language shapes posture and posture shapes destiny. He says destiny has been adjusting its seat to welcome you fully. He says your yes will no longer be rented by fear. He says your no will no longer be bullied by guilt. He says choices will begin to taste like clean water. He says the person I am sending speaks gratitude with fluency. He says gratitude keeps success from becoming noise. He says in that quiet, breakthroughs can be heard. He says memory will organize itself around truth rather than trauma. He says truth gives memory better furniture to sit on. He says comfort comes when the room is arranged with care. He says your creativity is a tide already on the move. He says the right companion becomes shoreline, not barrier. He says shorelines do not argue with waves that carry purpose. He says carry a small notebook for flashes of clarity. He says clarity does not shout when you are busy. He says it delivers gifts to those who make a pocket for them. He says prepare a ritual of closure for habits that cannot come forward. He says closures deserve candles and dignity. He says endings that are honored end cleanly. He says the one arriving knows how to celebrate in ways that heal rather than exhaust. He says celebration becomes medicine when it chooses presence over spectacle. He says medicine works best when taken in honesty. He says you will craft boundaries that feel like architecture, not barbed wire. He says architecture invites beauty while holding form. He says form protects freedom by giving it shape. He says you can trust the texture of days that do not require performance. He says authenticity spends less energy and produces more fruit. He says fruit that nourishes is worth planting again. He says embrace mentorship where pride once erected fences. He says humility will move you faster than defensiveness ever did. He says the person I am sending carries a humility that steadies rooms. He says your future greets you with a handshake firm enough to reassure. He says reassurance is a bridge between caution and courage. He says you will cross it without strain. He says your words will soften without losing precision. He says precision is kindness when aligned with truth. He says careless language cannot rent space in your mouth anymore. He says prioritize environments where feedback is offered like bread, not like bricks. He says bread is meant to be shared, not thrown. He says the one arriving knows how to share. He says you are permitted to enjoy the goodness that repeats. He says repeated goodness is not suspicious when discernment is awake. He says discernment is awake now. He says the story you are living is wide enough to carry partnership and purpose simultaneously. He says nothing requires you to choose starvation in the name of destiny. He says destiny thrives when you are nourished. He says the stillness growing inside you is not emptiness. He says it is depth. He says depth gives meaning to motion. He says your hands remember how to bless without demanding attention. He says your presence will feed rooms without becoming their meal. He says the one arriving knows how to eat and how to bring food. He says a healthy partnership is a duet where both voices keep their timbre. He says harmony is not hiding. He says melody is not monopoly. He says the quiet confidence blooming in you will make noise unnecessary. He says unnecessary noise will become easy to spot and easy to decline. He says decline becomes a gift when given early. He says your calendar can host Sabbath spaces even on busy weeks. He says rest woven through the day is stronger than rest quarantined to a weekend. He says the person I am sending honors those weavings. He says choosing kindness for yourself does not subtract kindness from others. He says abundance gains momentum when kindness circulates inward and outward. He says circulation is a sign of health. He says your inner child will sit at this new table and be allowed to eat first sometimes. He says play will be a guest of honor rather than a tolerated interruption. He says delight will attend often and leave the place better. He says grief will still visit but will stop rearranging your furniture. He says it will sit for a while, share stories, and then go home. He says you will bless its honesty and keep your peace. He says old narratives will try to send postcards from past addresses. He says you will recognize the handwriting and file them without rereading. He says filing is not denial, it is stewardship. He says practice small ceremonies of gratitude at thresholds. He says thresholds multiplied by gratitude become gateways. He says gateways introduce you to scale. He says scale becomes sustainable when rooted in character. He says character grows well in soil watered by accountability. He says the person I am sending keeps water close. He says the language of your body matters in every decision. He says a settled stomach is a signed agreement from wisdom. He says heed that signature and you will waste less time. He says goals written from joy travel farther than goals written from fear. He says joy supplies fuel that does not pollute your spirit. He says the one arriving is a station that stocks this fuel. He says love will look like consistent logistics and not just poetic lightning. He says consistent logistics build trust at street level. He says trust is what allows poetry to stay. He says name your priorities with verbs rather than nouns. He says verbs keep life moving. He says movement guided by meaning feels like flow. He says the gifts you carry will stop auditioning in rooms unworthy of them. He says the right rooms will send invitations without insult. He says invitations will honor your preparation. He says your humor will return with a wiser grin. He says laughter with wisdom heals faster than laughter without context. He says you will laugh often and heal deeply. He says the person I am sending will not confuse intensity for intimacy. He says they will invest in slow brightness. He says slow brightness lasts longer than sudden glare. He says your evenings will hold rituals that anchor. He says anchoring feels like writing, stretching, quiet music, and gentle light. He says anchors keep boats honest during wind. He says not every opportunity deserves to meet your best self. He says discernment will assign versions of you to the right tasks. He says the right tasks will upgrade your life without downgrading your peace. He says practice asking for help like a fluent sentence. He says help is a community ritual, not a confession of failure. He says the one arriving participates with joy. He says your generosity will carry boundaries that ensure it remains generosity and not martyrdom. He says martyrdom without purpose is theft from the self. He says the person I am sending guards you from such thefts. He says you will become easier to love as you become easier on yourself. He says self-kindness smooths the path under every relationship. He says smoothing is not erasure, it is care. He says interruptions will start feeling like invitations to presence. He says presence is the most accurate power you possess. He says power directed by presence heals more than it hurries. He says commitments will be chosen for depth rather than breadth. He says depth feeds legacy. He says legacy tastes like people who felt safe around you. He says the one arriving holds safety as sacred. He says sacredness teaches posture without preaching. He says posture communicates before any word is spoken. He says opposing forces will tire quickly when they meet your calm. He says calm ends arguments that ego tries to schedule. He says unscheduled peace is your new advantage. He says continue designing days that mirror the life you are calling in. He says your design is already attracting the right collaboration. He says collaboration opens doors you could not pry alone. He says you will sleep like someone who trusts the morning. He says morning will keep its promises. He says promises kept become architecture in the soul. He says you are arriving at a season where reflection comes with celebration attached. He says celebration integrated into reflection produces wisdom that travels. He says traveling wisdom blesses every room you enter. He says your hands will bless the work without gripping it to the point of bruising. He says the one I am sending will model this balance. He says balance practiced together becomes culture. He says your phone will ring with opportunities that match your standards. He says standards maintained in private create miracles in public. He says miracles prefer integrity over spectacle. He says continue practicing the art of beginning gently and finishing strong. He says beginnings announce tone and tone becomes ecosystem. He says ecosystems grow lives that feel like home. He says you are learning to enjoy results without worshipping them. He says worship belongs to the source, not the outcome. He says this alignment keeps you light and effective. He says your presence will become a sanctuary for those who are ready to heal. He says readiness recognizes readiness. He says the person arriving meets you at that recognition. He says this continuation is a ribbon threaded through your hours. He says the knot that secures it is your daily consent to peace. He says your consent remains firm. He says keep your windows open to laughter, your doors open to integrity, and your table open to honest bread. He says with these open places, the arrival will find you with ease. He says ease does not mean small, it means right. He says you are now fluent in the difference between noise and music. He says choose music. He says the one arriving is already humming.